Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Dirks, and on behalf of ACRL and Choice, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, What's New in APA Style, inside the 7th edition of the Publication Manual of the American Psychological Association. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from ACRL and Choice that addresses new ideas, developments, and products of interest to the academic library community. Free to users, these structured 60-minute live presentations provide the opportunity for interactive discussions of important new issues and developments in academic librarianship by librarians, vendors, authors, and other interested stakeholders. Before we get started, I'd like to point out a few features of the webinar software. In the main area of the screen, you should be able to follow along with the presentation materials. Along the right-hand side, you may see a Q&A panel or a chat panel. If you don't, you can look at the button that's trying hard to look like a dialog cloud on the bottom of your screen to open up the chat. And the Q&A panel you can find in the button right next to it with 3 little dots. Please use the Q&A panel to submit questions to our speakers. We'll take some time at the end to answer as many as we have time for, so please do send them in throughout. And if you're experiencing any sort of technical issue, please use the chat box to message me directly, and we will troubleshoot that with you there. All right, today we're using the hashtag ACRL Choice Webinars during the presentation. So if you have another screen handy, shout out to us. We're at choice_reviews on Twitter. Also note that we are recording today's program, and everyone that signed up should receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording. So with that, I believe we are ready to get started, and I will turn the floor over to Haley.
All right, thank you, Mark, and thank you everyone for coming to our webinar today. Let's give it a second for the slide deck to come up, and then we'll get started. There we go. It's our webinar, What's New in APA Style, inside the 7th edition of the Publication Manual of the American Psychological Association. And for anyone who wasn't here at the beginning, my name is Haley Kamen, and I'll be presenting with Chelsea Lee and Tim McAdoo on the APA Style team of the American Psychological Association. And so this webinar is going to be structured to look at each chapter of the newly released 7th edition of the Publication Manual individually. And throughout, we'll discuss content that is new or updated in that chapter and ways that those updates can be used to facilitate both the teaching and learning of APA style and scholarly writing more generally. And so by the end of this session, our aims are that you'll have an enhanced understanding of 7th edition APA style. You'll understand what's been new or updated in the 7th edition of the Publication Manual and some of the rationale for those changes. Feel ready to transition and facilitate your students' transition to 7th edition APA style. And in learning all of this, be able to accomplish APA's goal of writing with clarity, precision, and inclusion.
So this is Chelsea Lee. I want to talk a bit about the new features of the book itself. This is our first full color book, and in the spiral bound edition, we have tabs that make your life easier of having to be able to flip to the different sections. We also have ebooks available. And some of the key features that we strove to make happen were to have a broader student focus for this version of the manual, and also to have a more task-based organization. So we know that you want to know, when do I put a retrieval date in the reference? And so the sections of the manual are broken down such that you'll see headings like retrieval dates to answer those questions about specific things that you want to do. Additionally, we know that accessibility is a very important concern for our users around the world, and we have been working with accessibility experts to make sure that APA style is accessible. And so that topic is addressed in the introduction to the manual, and we're going to point out as we go through various features that we have that make APA style more accessible. Additionally, we want to point out that some of the reason for the manual are we have updates to reflect best practices for conducting science and the language that you use. Those are things we're going to talk about in more detail as we go on. And in addition, we've spent the last 10 years or so listening to everyone's feedback, and our goal is for you to help make writing easier. And so we hope that you will agree that that is the case. So we, on the next page, have some slides that show you the inside cover of the manual includes tables that are quick questions that you might want to find the answers to about heading styles, as well as basic in-text citation styles. And then on the back cover, common references at a glance, covering things like journal articles, newspaper articles, dictionary entries, government reports, YouTube, web pages. So it's really easy to find what you're looking for. We're now going to move into talking about the book on a chapter-by-chapter basis.
And so I'll start by talking about Chapter 1, which is our Scholarly Writing and Publishing Principles chapter. And so this chapter broadly introduces writers to the 2 key elements to consider before writing a scholarly work, which is the type of paper to write either for publication in a scholarly journal or submission to a student course, and then the ethical principles to follow when conducting the research and writing that paper. And some novel features about the 7th edition, Chapter 1 in the 7th edition manual are that we cover more types of professional articles than in previous editions, and these include qualitative, mixed methods articles, replication studies, and additional types of papers that are published in journals. We also address how to adapt APA style for use in student papers by adding descriptions of common types of student papers, which include response and reaction papers, various types of essays a student writes, as well as information on how APA style can be used when writing dissertations and theses. And we're clear throughout Chapter 1 that students should always consult their academic instructor or institution for specific guidelines and requirements when it comes to student assignments. We also have in Chapter 1 some information on planning for and ensuring compliance with ethical standards, which has been updated to reflect best practices in research, with expanded content discussing steps to take in sharing and retaining data, both quantitative and qualitative data, and some of the special considerations for each, as well as resources for de-identifying qualitative data and protected health information. And then in Chapter 1, as shown here, and throughout the manual, we have a couple of checklists that are there to help writers organize their papers and avoid them from missing important content in those papers. And then I'll move into Chapter 2, which is our paper elements and format chapter. And so this contains some of the content that's designed mostly for novice users, but useful for all users of APA style, covering the essentials of paper elements, format, and organization. And so we have content here for papers intended both for professional authors and student authors, which I'll be discussing in a little bit more detail, and which in the manual will include both sample title pages and full papers for both those paper types. Edition also has more and clearer guidance on heading levels with examples shown throughout the paper and specifically in the introduction. And so shown here is a great feature of the tab in the spiral version of the manual that Chelsea mentioned, and it's that each tab has its own specific table of contents, and we've added more sections to that TOC to help make it easier to navigate to exactly the content that you want to get to. And shown here is the Chapter 2 table of contents, which is broken down to sections for each type of paper, student and professional, each type of element that goes into that paper, and then the formatting and organizational elements that apply to all APA style papers. And that includes things like line spacing, paragraphs, headings, section labels. And shown here is our newly added title page designed specifically for students. And as shown with these callouts, it includes information relevant to students, including course name and number, the instructor name and due date, and eliminates some of the content, unless requested by the instructor, that doesn't apply to student papers, specifically the running head and author notes. But professional papers In all papers, we've also updated the byline and affiliation format to make it easier and more consistent with other publishers. And so notably, the author affiliations have been moved out of the author note and then onto their own line on the title page. And then we're now using superscript numerals to connect author names to those affiliations, which again is more consistent with how other publishers tend to format their title page and makes it easier for authors to submit and resubmit works to any journal. And then continuing to talk about the author note, we've also updated that. And again, author notes are still required for professional papers. And those have been simplified and also updated to include more information on things like disclosures, conflicts, and other information that is important to evaluating the quality of an article and promoting transparency. So again, this is a screenshot from the book where you have call to show exactly what content goes with each paragraph of that author note. And we've also updated our recommendations regarding fonts to be more flexible. And as shown here, specify that it can be in any sans serif or serif font that is accessible to all users with options for those specific fonts shown in the book. Similarly, we have streamlined our heading format to make it easier to remember and implement and assist all authors, particularly those who use the headings feature of their word processing program. And so as shown in this table here, there continue to be the 5 heading levels in APA style, but we've made them more consistent such that all are written in bold title case, and they're easier to remember. As shown here, you center level 1, levels 2 and 3 are both left align, levels 4 and 5 are both indented right into the text. And we show you examples in the book of how those heading levels are implemented, as well as the text that comes after, both throughout the book and then into the introduction as well. And then finally, I'll just end by showing 2 screenshots of our sample papers. So again, we now have sample papers for both a professional paper and a student paper, both of which have call-outs to show the implementation of specific APA-style elements like line spacing, headings, references, paraphrasing, quotations, and then call-outs to identify exactly what the element we're pointing to is and where to find more information on it in the book.
So in Chapter 3, we have a dedicated section for journal article reporting standards. These standards were a part of the APA 6th edition manual, and they were updated in 2018. The quantitative standards were updated in 2018, and new standards were published for qualitative and mixed methods research. So the manual is a place for researchers to become oriented to journal article reporting standards. There's additional information available on the JARS website, which the web address for that is linked at the bottom of this slide. So some of the features of this chapter, in addition to outlining the main sections that you'll have for a quantitative, qualitative, or mixed methods paper, you have various charts and tables to help you use the standards. For example, there are a lot of different tables to choose from depending on the research design that you're using if you're a researcher who's conducting a study. And here, this chart helps you pick which tables that you need to use depending on the research design. For example, if you used a longitudinal design, if you had random assignment, and so forth. Additionally, these standards are presented in a table format where you can go through and check off piece by piece to make sure that you're reporting the information that needs to be reported. And the goal of the JARS standards is that you are increasing the transparency of your research. So this is an important aspect as science moves toward more replications coming as being something that people do. And so it makes sure that if someone reads your work, they understand what you did, why, and if possible, they can replicate your research as well. In Chapter 4, we have a dedicated section for writing style and grammar. The main topics that are covered are effective scholarly writing, grammar and usage, and strategies to improve your writing. So this is a chapter aimed at anybody who needs help in these areas. And we have a number of visual displays that we think will be very helpful to learning and teaching this content. For example, many people have questions about what kind of verb tense you should use when you're writing an APA-style paper. And there's a chart, as shown here, that says, for example, if you're reporting results, use past tense. And so we think that is going to answer a lot of common questions. Likewise, one of the new changes to the manual is use of the singular they. Singular they is a third-person singular pronoun when you have two cases when you might be using it. The first is when people use they as their pronoun. Of course, you should use it. And the second is when you're talking about a person whose gender is unknown or irrelevant to the context, just like an individual or a person, that the singular they is a way to promote inclusivity and respect. And so the manual explains why we're promoting the singular they as part of inclusivity and respect, and then also shows examples of proper usage. In addition, this content is available on the APA-style website, so that there's a lot of places to find out information about it. In addition, in Chapter 4, we have just minor revisions to our guidance on avoiding improper writing practices. For example, information on use of contractions and colloquialisms, anthropomorphism, avoiding illogical comparisons, avoiding jargon, proper pronoun use, such as avoiding the editorial we, picking the correct first-person pronouns to use when you're talking about something that you did. This guidance, the guidance itself is largely the same as it was in the 6th edition, but it's broken down into more discrete sections, and the examples are all updated to cover not only psychology, but other areas in which people use the APA style, including nursing, business, and so forth. In Chapter 5, we've now dedicated a whole chapter to APA's bias-free language guidelines. These guidelines help people write about others with inclusivity and respect. And I wanted to point out how much this is tied to APA's mission of helping people support people who are in marginalized communities. So the guidelines here are, some of them have been updated and some of them are new. We worked with panels of experts who provided their recommendations on best practices. So you can see here that the information on participation in research, socioeconomic status, and intersectionality is all new. And then the guidance on age, disability, gender, racial and ethnic identity, and sexual orientation has all been updated. So you can see here there's a lot of text to look at, but it's hopefully going to cover the questions that people have about, for example, proper terms for gender identity if you're talking about transgender or gender nonconforming people, or similarly if you're talking about people with disabilities using person first language or identity first language. So those kind of topics are important, we think, for everyone to know as they write their papers. In Chapter 6, we move into the mechanics of style, nuts and bolts of how your paper works, covering the areas of punctuation, spelling, capitalization, italics, abbreviations, numbers, statistics, presentation of equations, and lists. One of people's favorite things to talk about is always, do you love one space after a period? Or maybe you don't love it so much. But our new recommendation is indeed to use one space after end punctuation. And in addition, the examples and guidance within the sections all really lay it out clearly about how to use various punctuation marks. Another change related to accessibility, which I mentioned earlier, is we're promoting a broader use of quotation marks rather than italics. So for example, when you're referring to a letter, word, phrase, or sentence as a linguistic example or as itself, you would use quotation marks. This is not only what people tend to do if they're writing without having read the manual, but it also supports accessibility because broad, long strings of italic text can be challenging to read. And on the internet, it's often not possible to use italics. So we think that this change is going to be helpful to a lot of people. In addition, people have a lot of questions about spelling, particularly related to technology terms. We provide guidance on what dictionaries you should use, and then a handy list of some common technology-related words right there for you, so you don't even have to look them up. Similarly, the guidance on capitalization is largely the same as it was in the 6th edition. However, we've added tons more examples covering all of the areas that people use for APA style, including, especially for nursing, to have more medical-related examples, really having sections be related to the things that you're trying to find out. So, for example, sections on job titles, diseases and disorders, which is what's shown here, how to do capitalization for headings, how to do capitalization in references. It's really spelled out for you in an easy-to-find kind of way. That brings us to Chapter 7, which is dedicated to tables and figures. Our goal here was to update all the examples and make sure that we're covering a variety of research types and topics, and that we're addressing both new users of style who are maybe at the beginning of university, or they're more advanced researchers and they need complicated examples to look at. So some adjustments that we made here were to have a standardized format for tables and figures. So whereas before the figure format had a caption that appeared only below, now both tables and figures have a number, a title, then the table or the figure itself, and then a note on the bottom. And so they're set up the same way. And you can see there that the number is bold as well, which it matches like all the section headings are bold. So it's consistently done. Likewise, there are checklists for both tables and figures to help you know if you've made, is it necessary, and then have you dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's within each of those kind of graphical displays. We also have more than 40 new sample tables and figures. For the tables, there's 24 new examples. Here you can see an example of a demographic characteristics table and an example of a correlation table. So these are sort of more basic examples. In addition, there's plenty of more advanced examples as well. Likewise, for figures, we have the classics of bar graphs and line graphs, as well as examples that can take advantage of the color. For here, you can see a map and an example of experimental setup. And in addition, on the website, we have information about how to use color accessibly in figures. And so if someone has color blindness, how can you pick colors to make sure that the person can understand your figure when you're using color? And you'll find that information on our APA style website in the section about tables and figures, and we'll show you how to get there later. So that brings us to Chapter 8, and I'm going to hand that over to Tim.
Thank you. Moving on to citations and references. Chapter 8 is about crediting works in the text. We give examples of in-text citations and also talk about personal communications, issues of plagiarism, self-plagiarism, how to paraphrase and quote. So jumping right in. The first thing the chapter begins with is discussing the appropriate level of citation. People often have questions about like, should I put a citation just at the end of the paragraph, or is it okay to have multiple citations? So we talk about, we give this example, and we talk about why it's important to achieve the appropriate level. Under citation can lead to plagiarism and self-plagiarism issues. Here you see a table for the new simplified in-text citations. The format is the same, but the change is that with 3 or more authors, you can abbreviate at all from the very first time. We did that to simplify life for everyone, hopefully. We can, you'd have the consistent citation style throughout the paper, unless you have cases where there are multiple references that would abbreviate to the same, and then you have those guidelines have not changed, and they're all spelled out in this chapter. Here we have a figure where we've used the color to show the 4 elements of a reference that we talk about later in chapters 9 and 10. It is author, date, title, and source. And We use this to show the relationship between a reference and the citation. Another common question we have is, after someone figures out how to do a reference, they want to know how to do the in-text citation. It's always the same. It's the author and the date. We added examples of quotation formatting. The formatting hasn't really changed, but we realized with questions over the years that there are so many different ways that are all right, but the different ways have different punctuation, different places to put the elements. So we gave more examples here and put it in this table format and examples in the text that hopefully clarify and give people more to model. We have new guidance on how to cite classroom and intranet resources and explaining when that's appropriate and when it's not appropriate. When it's not appropriate, it's still true to cite as personal communication, and we give examples of that as well. And in the personal communication section, we also have new guidance on citing oral traditions and traditional knowledge. What is shown here is just one example. It's a longer section that we think will be very useful. And then Chapter 9 is about a reference list, how to format an individual reference, the 4 elements of a reference. First, we again want to show this relationship between the 4 elements of a reference and where you really find those elements in your source work. So we gave one sort of common example and color-coded that. And with each reference in the next chapter, we have shown both the reference and the in-text citations so people can see that correspondence. So here, this is just a little bit of the chapter that shows how to order the reference list. The guidelines here really have not changed, but we have updated the examples. This table is how to create a reference if you're missing an element. We had a version of this on our old blog, and people really responded to it well. So we put it here, and that way it's a template for what to do if you're missing these sort of common things that can be missing. We also include guidelines on the new DOI format and URLs. The DOI format is shown throughout all the reference examples, and for references that do include URLs, we are no longer recommending including retrieved from or accessed from, just putting the URL in the reference. Another common question is whether links should be live links, and that is, they can be live if the work is to be read online. So either format is okay, just consider the audience, the intended audience. New in the chapter is some guidelines on annotated bibliographies. Relatively short, we included these to show the formatting, how to do citations in the annotations, but we still leave to the instructor the other details about when they're appropriate and how to do them. So Chapter 10 is reference examples. We have more than 100 new examples. We have examples for websites and social media, new examples for journal articles and different kinds of online materials. And again, with each category, we showed templates. I'll show that in a minute. That's to help people do more than just try to model the reference examples. They can see the pieces of each reference and hopefully put together with the information that they have. And with each example, we also have the parenthetical and narrative citations, again, to make that link between the reference and the citation. Here you have the table of contents for this chapter. You can see how the references are organized by category. So starting with journal articles, I won't go through each of the categories, but we do want to hit the highlights, the new interesting changes. The issue number should always be included in a reference to a journal article. This is a change from the old guideline, which we heard lots of feedback about, and we heard you. hopefully that makes making journal article references easier. We also have, if you look at example 1, that's an example with a DOI. Example 3 are examples without a DOI that you read either in print or in a database. As you can see there, there's no need to include a URL or the database name. The other major change to journal articles is to spell out up to 20 author names, and that was made to simplify the process of creating references. We heard that a lot of references fell into that area with 7 authors or 8 authors, and you had to look up what is the guideline on this, and hopefully you just won't run into the guideline as often if you can go all the way up to a reference that could have as many as 12 or 15 or 20 authors. Of course, we're well aware lots of articles will have, that is to say, some articles will have lots of authors, and in those cases we still do include the ellipses, and we show an example. It's example 4 in the manual. Moving on to books, big change here is that the publisher location is no longer required. We hear that feedback as well. And you can see in these 2 examples, again, one with the DOI, one without, which is either that you're reading a print version that just doesn't happen to have a DOI, or you're reading a book chapter from a database, per se. This also shows the templates, and you can see that this is meant to help readers put together their reference if the source they have doesn't quite fit the examples we have. You can see the required pieces to put together that reference type. We added social media examples, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Reddit, again with templates to hopefully stay current with other types of social media that people might want to cite. And we have new web page and website reference examples. And these show an italic title, again, to standardize, take some of the guesswork out of what to italicize, what not to italicize. And we included instructions on how to cite group authors. A common question has been that people look at websites and think there is no author, or they can't find an author, and frequently it's just that it's a group author. So we give guidelines on that and show examples. And Chapter 11 is legal references. These have been updated. They're still based on the Blue Book style, and you can see that we have given some common cases. And with that, it's back to Haley.
So I'll take us through the last chapter of the book, which is our chapter on the publication process. And so this chapter will be useful for both early career researchers as well as more advanced researchers. It walks you kind of through the publication process, from getting your article ready for submission through what to do after your article is accepted or not, and then what happens during the publication process. We give some advice for early career researchers on things like adapting or a dissertation or thesis into a journal article, selecting and prioritizing journals, avoiding deceptive or predatory journals. We talk you through the online submission process, using online portals to submit your articles and working with proofs. And then we also provide templates and examples of copyright attributions. And so shown here is kind of a flow chart of the manuscript publication process, again, kind of breaking it down for you with more detailed sections, all this content in the book, and then some excellent tables that show you templates and examples of how to create copyright attributions and permission statements for a variety of different works. And so that takes you through the book. So I'll just end by mentioning the new APA-style website. I saw a couple questions from people asking about whether the website or blog were going to be updated, and the answer is yes to both. The website has already been updated, and we now have essential pages shown at the top of your screen on that style and grammar guidelines in red that provide essential pages on a variety of topics covering all the things we talked about in the session so far. We also have links to different products, obviously the publication manual, which is another question, is now out for release in order able to be ordered, as well as the concise guide to APA style, which is going to be our undergraduate specific version of the manual and releasing in December. We also have added a new instructional aids page, which has downloadable and printable handouts and templates that you can use in your courses or send your students to use. And then the blog will still remain and will continue to be updated with new posts talking about some of the changes in the 7th edition manual.
So within the styling grammar guidelines, I wanted to point out the page about accessibility of APA style itself. If you want to find out more information about this, you go to the paper format category and you'll find that information. There is another link to the web accessibility statement for the whole apa.org website, which is available through the website footer. So just because those two things are slightly different, we wanted to point out how to get to what you might be looking for. The information that is currently available on this page talks about typography, creating accessible headings, and including URLs and reference list entries in an accessible way. And so we hope that if that topic is of interest to you, that you will check it out.
Okay, so we have a few common questions answered on this slide and the next. And after this, we'd be happy to take any additional questions. We saw some come in through the chat, so we might just run through those first.
So I know there were a couple questions, like starting at the beginning about Chapter 1. And so I want to be clear that the running head, yes, is still required for professional papers. If you intend to submit your paper to a journal, they're still going to expect the running head, with the caveat that you no longer need to put that running head label on the first page. The running head will look the same on all pages. You don't have to worry about implementing different formatting. It's just student papers that won't require it unless, as the instructor, you request it. And we are also very clear in the book distinguishing what is a required element for professional versus student paper. That's outlined right at the beginning of Chapter 2. And then in terms of margins, again, you're just going to set your margins to 1 inch and create your header within that. You shouldn't have to change the default settings of most word processing programs.
So I saw a few questions about the products that are available, and we hope, and related ones, so we hope to have a free tutorial about APA style available next year. We're working on it right now. Someone asked, are there chapter table of contents in the non-spiral version too? Yes, all of the versions of the book have the table of contents in it. And you'll find an abbreviated version at the beginning, and then within each chapter, there's the contents for that chapter. So it helps you get where you're going really quickly. Let's see.
And to clarify, I saw a question about concise guide. So that is just adapted from the publication manual, but we've taken from the publication manual only the content that's specific to students. So it's just taking out some of the content about ethical standards, publishing, that we don't expect students to know. So there's not any new content. It's just kind of an abridged version designed for students. So it won't have everything, but if you think your students will be more amenable to that, that'll be available in December.
We also have heard a lot of demand for the manual in Spanish. We're currently talking with different publishers to make that happen, but it hasn't happened yet. Stay tuned on the APA Style website for an announcement about that in the future. Relatedly, some people have asked, we have the ability to review grammar and spelling with APA 6th edition with Microsoft Word. Is APA working with Microsoft to update Word? Word is in charge of Word, and so we expect to see their updates in the future. I'm not sure when that's happening, but stay tuned.
But we can speak to Academic Writer, which will be updated in 2020, and that's APA's Word program, where you can create your papers in that, as well as get information via tutorials and quick guides on APA style.
And we also want to emphasize that the APA style website is already updated for the 7th edition. So the topics that we covered today are available on those style and grammar guidelines pages, and all that information is available for free and designed to be able to answer your questions in a really quick task-based answer. Okay, I see a few more questions about references in particular. Someone asked, do we still include names of databases in the reference list, for example, ERIC and ProQuest? So there is a section about including database information in references on the website as well as in the book. And broadly speaking, no. If you're using an academic research database, you do not need to include database information in your reference. That is because we know that different people have different subscriptions to different databases, and sometimes the same content is available in multiple databases. When we were writing our book, we need to write a book that's working for everybody. And so whereas a student is using the manual to create a paper for maybe their one class, and so yes, of course, their teacher can probably get into the same database as them, it's also being used for professionals who are publishing. And out in the world, people have different access. And so if you encounter the case that a work from an academic research database does not have a DOI, most of the time, you do not need to provide database information. We provide a quick list of a few exceptions. Some of those are if you're looking at limited edition materials. So for example, some documents in ERIC are available only in ERIC. And so then it is relevant to tell your readers that you need to go to ERIC to get this particular document. And so the list of what those databases might be and the cases and related examples are also in the manual. For a related case, people have asked if you have a journal article without a DOI and it's in the academic research database, do you need to put a retrieval date? Do you need to put anything? Do you need to look up the journal homepage? In this manual, if you have the case of a journal article or a periodical article from an academic research database that does not have a DOI, after the page range, you end the reference, rather than having to go look up extra information. So we know that people have search engines and that they can find access to these widely available things in academic databases.
And that's similar to the updates, including the issue number for journal articles. If you see the issue number, include it. If you don't see the issue number, don't include it. The change is just meant so you don't have to go looking for the pagination to figure that out. You just include an issue number anytime you see it. And similarly for the book references, you don't include the publisher location, even if you happen to see it, knowing that there can be multiple locations or that some online books may not have a location.
Another question we saw in the chat was about including retrieval dates. I think that is about when to include retrieval dates. The manual explains that if you have the case of a work that's designed to change and the page that you're looking at is not archived, then you would include a retrieval date. So the majority of references don't need it, and the ones that do, the examples show when you should include it and the format that you should use. Let's see, I saw another question. Are there any changes with legal references? Largely no. One difference is that the official Blue Book format does not require URLs. However, the URL could be helpful, and so in the APA style version of those references, the URL of the work that you are using can be added to the end of the reference.
And then I'm just putting up some questions here. We've seen a bunch of questions about the license for institutional version of the manual. And so just to clarify, we do not currently have plans for that, to answer that question. And for people worried about or wondering whether they should go out and buy the 7th edition or wait for the reprint, we want to assure you that this update was made by a dedicated team of APA-style experts. Changes were based on thousands of emails and questions on the blog and focus groups that we got from users, and we updated them based on information from experts of various fields, and then the book was copy edited and proofed. We feel confident that you should go out and get the 7th edition right now. And I think Chelsea may have mentioned this, but you people have been asking about what they should do in this interim period between 6th and 7th edition, and we fully recognize that there will be people who continue to use 6th edition style, whether because they're not ready to make that transition, or if they're writing their dissertation or writing a journal article. We don't expect you to go back and edit your entire dissertation. You can continue using 6th edition style, and information on that will be up on the website, clearly labeled as such for the near future. You can still get that content and make that transition in a timeline that works for you and your institution.
I see another question here. Do you provide examples of secondary source citations? Yes, we do. And explain when you might use a secondary source and when you shouldn't, and that when you do, how you want to make it, how you want to structure it. One of my favorite questions. I sometimes find it extremely difficult to classify an online source in order to use the proper format for a citation. For example, an online newsletter versus a blog versus just a web page. Any advice? Yes, I have the advice for you. In the beginning of Chapter 9, there's a section about determining the reference category, and it answers exactly your question. And so we understand that it can be challenging to navigate because there's a lot of things on the internet and you don't always know, it doesn't always neatly fit into a category. So there's two things that will help with that. One, there are more examples covering more cases that exist out in the world right now. And two, the formats largely go into two camps. There's either things that are formatted like periodicals, which are journal articles, magazine articles, newsletters, and then things that are formatted like books and reports. And web pages are formatted like books and reports. So you have the italic title, and then the source is going to be the site name plus the URL of the site, the web page that you were using. And in some cases, you can omit the site name because it's the same as the author. So it's really spelled out for you about which category that you should use, and then the template in the Chapter 10 is going to show you how to put the pieces together for the work that you're trying to cite.
Another question I see is whether it's quicker to order through APA or through a second party like Amazon. And the answer to that is, at least for now, through APA, we can guarantee that we have copies and that they will ship. We can't speak to Amazon and the timeline of their shipments. So if you have a choice, you can go to apa.org or apastyle.org and order your copy of the publication manual there.
I see a question here. If our goal with students is to introduce them to the way research is conducted in the field, would you recommend simply exposing them to the publishing rules instead of student-only rules? So that's an interesting question, and I think that the way that we've presented the information in the manual does introduce students to the way that publishing in psychology and social sciences works while acknowledging certain realities of the student experience. So, for example, when you're writing a student paper, like you don't need an author note because you're not publishing the paper. And likewise, when you're sending in a student paper, the professor might like to have information such as the date of the assignment and the course that the paper was submitted for. And so the student-centered, the student title page allows students to send the information that's relevant to their instructor, because that's the context that they're working in. However, lots of the content applies to everyone. So for example, the mechanics is for everyone. Stuff about how to create tables and figures is for everyone. The references and references and in-text citations is the same for everyone. So we do think that it's going to be the best of both worlds.
And then I see two questions related to tables. And if I understand the first correctly, it's asking about how to cite information in table when it comes from different sources. And so we do show examples in the tables and figure chapters of tables and figures with copyright attribution statements. So if you are adapting a table from another source, we show you how to correctly attribute that once they're in the public domain or ones that need a permission statement. There's examples of that. And then there are templates for creating those on your own when creating your own tables and figures. We'll also point out that the tables that are shown in the book are meant to show you what tables look like in the papers that you are creating when you're submitting them to a journal. which may or may not look different than how those tables look when they're typeset by that journal.
I see a question here. How long will you keep the 6th edition blog content online? Related questions, how long are 6th edition resources going to be available? So on the new APA Style website, there's a 6th edition archive that if you go to the Style and Grammar Guidelines menu, you'll see it in the bottom right-hand corner, a link to our FAQs and then the blog posts from the 6th edition. We know that it's going to take a while for people to transition to 7th edition, and so we have those resources available still. Everything else that's on the other pages of the website is updated for 7th edition. Our plan is to keep the 6th edition resources available at least through August 2020. Question here, is there an explanation on what predatory publishers are in the manual? Is there a checklist that can be used to identify a predatory publisher? Yes. That content is in Chapter 12, an exploration of what it means and warning signs to look for and other resources that can help you determine that you're working with someone who's trustworthy to publish with versus someone to avoid. Someone asked, will the ebook be a one-time purchase or will it be on an annual subscription basis? You can do a one-time purchase where you own it forever, or you can do the subscription. It's up to you. Both options are available. Question, why did you abandon official journal URL for non-DOI articles? So a few points with that. For the one, DOIs have become incredibly widespread since the publication of the 6th edition, and the vast majority of journal articles do have DOIs. Second, sometimes people would take that extra step of looking up who's the journal publisher for that journal, only to find that the journal doesn't actually provide their content on their own website. And so it could seem disingenuous to provide a URL when the reader can't necessarily get the content at that URL, depending on the journal that they're looking at. On a related note, some people have used session-specific URLs in their reference lists. For example, if you're using a proxy server at your university. And again, if you have the DOI, you don't need that because the DOI is the sort of a hyperlink of record for that work.
And then another question I see here is about whether it's discussion of open access publishing. And yes, Chapter 12, where we talk about publishing, does talk about open access, what that means, some of the incentives around that, like open science badges for being willing to openly share resources, material, and data. And then, Jim, you did hear correctly that the label running head no longer appears on the title page for professional papers. So again, you do need to include a running head on professional papers, but you do not need to include that label. So it's the same on every page.
A question here, what font size will students be required to use in their papers? One of the updates we made is to have more flexible font requirements. In Chapter 2, there's a list of possibilities that include Times New Roman 12 point, Calibri 11 point, and various other options. The goal here is that you use a legible and widely available font. So there's a lot of options. We provide some choices that are good choices for us. We know that if you use a different font, your paper might look longer or shorter. And so for that reason, we recommend that if you're gauging paper length, that you ask for a word count rather than a page count. Or if you're an instructor and you're sending, you're setting guidelines for your students, you can tell them, I want you to use 11-point Calibri or what have you, so that they all turn out the same. So those are two ways of addressing that, while balancing the need for flexible fonts, which is especially important for accessibility.
We've also been seeing some questions in the chat and online about advice for dissertations and theses. And so the manual touches on that a little bit in Chapters 1 and 12 by describing how APA style can be used for dissertations and theses, and introducing early researchers how they can adapt their dissertation and theses. So that's in the book, as well as there's some additional content online. But we don't delve too deeply into how you specifically format a thesis or dissertation, acknowledging that most institutions have very specific guidelines for doing that. and that this manual is used by many people in different disciplines. And so we want to leave that up to the institution or advisor to set those specific standards and guidelines for theses and dissertations and how those should be formatted. And then we have questions about general rules for references. And as Tim mentioned, for each of the different reference categories, we have templates. So for books, for periodicals, for social media, we have templates that you can follow that if any of the examples in the book don't look exactly like the source that you're looking at, you can use to construct your references. And to clarify, we are recommending that you use the standardized DOI format, which includes HTTPS and not just the DOI colon. And that brings us to 3 o'clock. So I don't know if Mark has any closing words, but we want to thank you very much for attending our session and hope this was helpful. And hopefully you've heard that this presentation will be posted on the ACRL Choice YouTube for any of those who couldn't make it or would like to watch it later.
Absolutely. This is Mark from ACRL and Choice, and I would just say a quick thank you to you, Haley, Chelsea, and Tim for taking the time to walk us through a whole bunch of changes to the 7th edition of the publication manual. Thank you for that. And I would just take a moment to remind everyone out there, as sort of has already been mentioned, we'll send out a link to the recording to everyone that registered. So be on the lookout for that probably first thing tomorrow morning. And if you have a moment to let us know how we did, you should see a link in your chat box to a quick survey that we would ask you to fill out to let us know how we did, and we appreciate you doing that. All right, so I think that's it. Thanks to everybody out there for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the session, and I hope the rest of your day is great. Bye-bye.